If your child interrupts you constantly, you are absolutely not alone. Every parent that I know hits this moment where the interruptions start to feel disrespectful and chaotic, and you just have this sense of like, they're old enough, they should know better. In today's episode, we're going to look at why kids interrupt, what impulse control and the developing sense of time have to do with this, specifically how our kids process time, and why so many of the behaviors that we read as rude are actually signs of the brain still having to learn how to pause, hold a thought, and trust that their needs are still going to matter even if they wait. But the beautiful part of all this is that there are some practical things that we can do to support the growing brain and reduce interruptions without shaming or shutting them down. Let's get into it. All right, so as you join me back out here on the porch, I've been trying to record like an episode almost every day, guys. And the reason that I've been trying to do this is because I'm just trying to get back in the habit of recording these episodes and just getting this content out, because so many people have come back and said, this is my favorite thing that you do, John. Like, your book is great, but the podcast is like the best part of my day or the best part of my week. And if I'm recording podcasts in this way where I'm mostly just answering questions and spitballing and just kind of talking about parenting, it's a lot easier for me to pump out a lot more. So obviously today, I've already said what we're talking about. We're talking about kids interrupting. We're talking about kids being rude and disrespectful sometimes. This is especially prevalent over the holiday season. We're in the middle of the holiday season when we're having these family get-togethers and our kids are just kind of constantly interrupting us and being in the middle of things. I wanted to share a quick story about this, actually. This happens to me basically every Sunday because I'm a pastor of a church, and it's something that I almost never talk about. But every single Sunday, I have this period of time immediately after the service is over where I go into kind of like Pastor John mode. And I guess I've been Pastor John mode the whole day, but or I guess the whole morning, but I'm specifically just caring for the needs of other people. And so I'm asking people about their day or their week. I'm asking people about struggles that they've maybe shared with me in confidence. I'm kind of being like a host slash therapist slash friend slash, just making sure that other practical things happen around the church. We're like planning for our Christmas program right now. So I'm also like directing where tables go and things like that. And my kids have this real challenge because I kind of go into this mode where I somewhat ignore them. And my wife is around, and she comes to church basically every week, and she'll be around to kind of care for them. But at some point she takes our daughter and she puts her in the car and she drives home because it's nap time. But I often have to stay beyond that point. And so here are my kids, and they will just come up to me and they will just like interrupt a really personal conversation oftentimes. And, I'll have to take somebody to like another room, and I'll have to like assign somebody, a caregiver or somebody who's around, to be like, okay, keep an eye on my kids. I have to physically remove and separate myself from them, because if they know where I am, they are going to come and find me. And it happened today. We were setting up, like I said, tables and stuff for this Santa Lucia festival that our church does. It's a Swedish Christmas festival where we have this teenage girl. This is kind of the highlights. We have a giant Swedish meal catered. It's like awesome. We have a Scandinavian folk group who plays. I play a character the whole time, the whole evening. I'm like this character, this Swedish guy. And so I talk in a really Swedish accent, and I just kind of do these things. And I'll actually speak Swedish for part of it. I write it out ahead of time because I'm not very good at Swedish. And it's just kind of this weird cultural thing. There's a teenage girl at one point in the whole thing who walks down the aisle with lit candles on her head, like actual fire. It's a very cultural. That's how I'll put it. And so I'm organizing for this, and I'm trying to do stuff, and my kids just keep coming up to me. And every single time I try and like do something, my kids are like, Dad, can I show you this? Can I show you this? Can I do this? Can I do this? And finally I'm just like, go find someplace to be. Because it's just like, I don't know. I didn't like yell at him, but I was like, guys, you just got to go find someplace to be. I'm not available right now. And So I started kept thinking like, oh man, like I got to do an episode on this because that's not how I should have responded in that moment. I could have done some other things better. I could have been working with them. Thankfully they did go and find something else. It's okay to tell your kids like, hey, I need some space right now to do like dad's doing work stuff. And it's so rare that I'm like that. But it does happen. It does happen. And so it's okay to do that. If you've ever done that, don't feel bad. Just know that I've done that. I do that, but there are better ways that we can talk about interrupting. And so I want to jump into our first question, which comes from Kayla with a K from Instagram. This one was DM'd in and it says, John, I have a question. Wondering if you can answer for me. My 4-year-old literally cannot let me finish a sentence ever. Like if I'm talking to my husband about anything, literally last night, it was about toilet paper. She will wedge herself in between us and start yelling, Mom, 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 until I look at her. I swear I'm trying to be patient, but it makes me feel disrespected or like she's not learning manners. My husband keeps saying that I'm letting her run the show. Am I? Or is this just what 4 is? I don't know. I can't really tell anymore. Kayla, this is a great question. And I love that you frame it around like, is this just what 4 looks like? And my answer to that is, yeah, in some ways, this is just what 4 looks like. I have almost like a 5.5-year-old. I have an almost 4-year-old. And I'll tell you, my 4-year-old doesn't struggle with this. My almost 4-year-old doesn't struggle with this nearly as much as my other kids that I've had, specifically my oldest when he was younger. And he's still to this day, he's 9. He struggles with this. He struggles to not be in the middle of the conversation. And my guess is, Kayla, that your 4-year-old is an oldest because oldists really struggle with this idea. They struggle with this, us having kind of a world or conversations outside of them. And specifically what they struggle with is just controlling their inhibitions. They have this limited brain development where it comes to working memory. And so the second something pops into their head, they have no ability to control that inhibition to just like blurt out what's going on. And as I'm going to talk about in the next question as well, because we had a person who's talking about when they're on the phone, it can also be dependent. It can also kind of rear up specifically in moments when our attention is specifically drawn away from them. So what happens in those moments is our kid literally is looking for this like attachment to us. And when they see our attention stray from them, this can actually feel, it can feel to their nervous system. I know this is kind of crazy to say, but it can feel to their nervous system like a threat. Like somehow if we start paying attention to something else, we won't be as aware of their needs and what's going on with them. And so kids have a really, really hard time with us diverting our attention away from them. And what this is, the fancy term for this is state-dependent executive functioning. So basically what this means is that they can do some of these executive functioning tasks at 4 years old in certain environments, like waiting their turn. Maybe all 4-year-olds struggle with sharing and things like that, but they can maybe in certain environments, like at school, they can wait to be called on when it's time to speak. But when they're with you, they kind of lose all ability to do that. And this is what I'm going to talk about again with the next one, because the kid's a little bit older, but I would even start to think of it in those terms right now. And understanding that that's what's going on, that they literally have this inability to control their inhibitions. They have an inability to control their kind of desire to just blurt out and get your attention. We have to give them a reframe of something alternative, a behavior that works, that isn't just saying mom, 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 mom every single time we're talking to your husband about toilet paper or whatever else, right? Like obviously that's a kind of a funny example because I don't want to say it's just your husband, but it's your husband. It's a person who's in close relationship. It's probably even more frustrating when that happens when you're out with a friend with your daughter, or when you're on a work call or something like that, and she can't handle that waiting. And so we have to give kids an alternative behavior, because in their brain, they don't have an ability to just wait in the abstract. And part of this is literally that they don't have a really clear sense of time yet. So I said at the beginning of the episode in the intro that we were going to talk a little bit about kids' understanding or perspective on time. Kids really struggle because of just the way that their brain is growing, that they really, really struggle to understand how to wait without having a very clear thing like a timer or something like that. And so what happens in those moments when that happens is our kids, when we say like, okay, wait for a minute or wait for 2 minutes, they literally have this experience of feeling like that experience is going to be forever. And so this is why often when we talk about kids who struggle to wait, what we're really talking about is kids who don't have a clear sense of time and understanding how long a period of time is. And so this all comes to a head when we're trying to do something in a time like that's time sensitive, like finish this conversation, and our kid just cannot cope. They cannot handle it because 5 minutes to them feels like an hour. So if you say like, I'm going to be done in this conversation in a minute, it feels like that it's either you're done now or you're not done now. And if you're not done now, I'm just going to have a meltdown because, it's not now yet. So I would really want to replace that. And I keep saying that we should replace this with the behavior, but the behavior comes from Montessori background. At least that's where I first learned about it. The behavior is to give them a physical thing to do with their body to simultaneously alert you that they need your attention or that they're desiring your attention without being unnecessarily rude or disruptive. And this is really great to start at 4 years old because you're going to have this tool. And like I said, my 9-year-old still does this. But what you're going to have them do is literally walk up to you and put their hand on your arm, just resting, not grab you, not slap you, but put their hand on your arm. And this essentially says to you as the parent, okay, I am looking to get your attention. Please, it's kind of like raising your hand in class. Please, I'm asking you to give me your attention as soon as possible. And oftentimes what parents will do, you don't have to do this. I actually never remember to do this. It still works. But what parents will do is they'll take their other hand. So say my kid puts his hand on my right arm, take my left hand and cover his hand to acknowledge, okay, I see you, I hear you, you're looking for my attention. And this bypasses that inhibition control because now they have this inability to restrict and control their impulse to interrupt you, but now they're able to do that in a way that's not disrespectful by putting their hand on your arm. So it's kind of an end around way of getting around the fact that their brain is literally not mature enough to wait in a practical sense, and just telling them, okay, it'll be a minute usually doesn't work because that feels like an interminable amount of time in the brain of a 4-year-old. So what I would do in this case is I would just literally say, okay, every time I'm talking, what you got to do is just come up and put your hand on me. And I promise you that as soon as I can get out of that conversation, or as soon as I can give you my attention, I will give you my attention. And it doesn't mean that you're going to immediately drop everything and do whatever it is they're asking you to do. It doesn't mean that they're going to put their hand on you and say, I want to leave and go home right now. And you're going to go, okay, great. You've not interrupted me. And so therefore I'm just going to give you whatever you want. It's just to say, look, attention is a natural desire for kids. And it feels threatening to them when they don't have their caregiver's attention. And so that's one of the ways that we can get around that, is to essentially give them a tool to, when our attention shifts, to get our attention back without being unnecessarily disruptive. And what the key here, really, the most basic level in all of this, is to understand that when our kids are interrupting us, it is because to our kids, our attention is a need. It's like food or water. And that's because their survival depends on our attention. This is why attention and attachment are so deeply connected. This is why we talk about attunement. I'm using a lot of A words today. We talk about attunement and attachment. And attunement is just giving your attention to such an extent to your child where you're able to pick up on their feelings and reflect their feelings back to them. And so understanding that when your kid is asking for your attention, they're actually asking for your attachment can be really, really helpful, because it allows you to then realize, okay, they're not being annoying, they're not being entitled. And these are all the things that we hear in our own head, right? This is the thing that your husband's saying. You're letting her run the show. She's being entitled. She's being a dictator. All of that language comes from a misunderstanding. And I'm not blaming your husband, right? Like, I think these things too, but all of that, especially in the heat of the moment. And that's the thing. When this happens, you get triggered and then you don't respond the way that you want to. Or I should say, you react rather than respond. And then it just kind of makes everything worse. So the main way to reframe this for you and for all of us as we continue on with these questions is to understand that all of these attention-seeking behaviors, like saying, mom, 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 in the middle of a conversation, are just them saying, I want to make sure that you're still there. And maybe there's more things going on here, like they have an inability to like hold on to a thought, but maybe I'll talk about that in a minute. So brass tacks, replace the behavior, give them a new neural pathway. And that new neural pathway, instead of screaming, mom, 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 is going to be to come over, put the hand on you. And this is going to be kind of my tip for all of these, but it's especially important within the first one with a 4-year-old, where some of the stuff that's not going to, they're not going to be able to do some of the other things, like go and set their own timer or whatever. So hopefully that gives you some ability to regulate some of that. And I want to move on to my next one, which was an emailed question. Thank you for an emailed question. We're always excited to receive emails, podcast@wholeparentacademy.com. You can send in your questions via email. It's the easiest way for me to sort them. But this one comes from Jeremy. And Jeremy says, okay, my 7-year-old constantly interrupts me, but only when I'm on the phone. Like, if I'm talking to him, he's fine. Hey, I'm interrupting myself in this episode. I want to have a really quick heart-to-heart. If you're listening right now, maybe you're on a walk, you're doing dishes, you're hiding from your kids in the bathroom, I'm guessing this podcast is doing something for you. Maybe it's grounding you, it's inspiring you, reminding you that you're not alone. Maybe it's the one corner of your week that doesn't feel loud or rushed or transactional. And I want you to know that's kind of the point. I make this show with love. I don't make it with algorithms. I'm doing this for you. But here's the deal. It costs money for me to make things like this that feel like a deep breath in the world that won't stop shouting. And so if you've been listening for a while and you haven't subscribed, this is your friendly nudge. It's $5 a month on Substack. That's literally less than that sad coffee that you ordered last week that you probably didn't even finish because your kids interrupted you. Please don't make me get dramatic, okay? Because honestly, if this isn't worth $5, I just don't know what is. So right now, if you can afford it at all, please go click the link in the show notes, become a paid subscriber on Substack, support the work that you want to stay alive. And seriously, thank you. Even if you walk away right now and you pretend that I didn't just say this, I'll know. No, I won't know, but I still love you. Please, 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 please consider supporting Whole Parent. It's the only way that I get paid to do this and social media. Oh, yeah, I actually recorded that and forgot one more thing. You also get bonus episodes. So if you need something in return, that's your return. Bonus episodes just for you as a paid subscriber. Okay, that's it. But the second I pick up a call for work, he absolutely loses his mind. He suddenly needs me urgently for no reason. It drives me insane. Honestly, it feels intentional. Like he knows that's the one thing that stresses me out. Well, Jeremy, I hear a couple of things going on here, and I'm going to kind of try and take them in different places, and hopefully we'll come up with a solution. But first and foremost, I have kids. My other kids, I said that I have one kid who struggles when I'm talking face to face with somebody. I have other kids who really, really struggle when I get on the phone, and all of a sudden they start fighting with each other. And I definitely have told myself that I've reframed that for myself as well and said, oh my gosh, they're only doing this because I'm on the phone and they're trying to get my attention. But I want to kind of flip that on its head and say that when your kid is experiencing one of these, and this is where I'm going to use that fancy term again, state-dependent executive functioning lack, right? When they're experiencing that, what's actually happening is that experience feels threatening to them. So it's not that it feels like they want you to not be able to do it. It's that they feel like all of a sudden my dad isn't paying attention to me. And what if I need him? And so I'm going to test the boundaries, or I'm going to test the waters and ask for a bunch of stuff, or I'm going to suddenly not be able to tie my own shoes, or I'm not going to be able to find this thing that I'm looking for, or all of a sudden I'm going to get hungry, or all of a sudden I'm going to need to go to the bathroom and I'm going to have a problem with that. All of this stuff, and I get he's 7, a lot of this stuff he should be able to do on his own. But all of that stuff is him feeling like, I don't know if I'm safe if my dad isn't paying attention to me. And he knows that when you're on the phone, that is one place and time where you're definitely not paying attention to him. And so the first thing that I would do is I would just get curious about that with him. The next time you have to take a phone call and this happens, I would not react in the moment, do whatever you do to survive. And then, and you, I don't want to say you should ignore him, but you don't have to immediately give in to everything, right? Unless you know, hey, this is just going to be easier for me, then do whatever you need to do to survive. But you don't have to give in to that. Like, you can build some frustration tolerance here. It's something that we've talked about in previous episodes. But what I would be looking for is an opportunity really to have a conversation after the fact, let's say 20, 30, 45 minutes later. So after the phone call, you return to stasis. He goes back into his normal way of being, where he doesn't constantly need you for everything. Now I wait for him to be actively engaged with something like drawing or doing whatever he's doing, not watching a screen, not on his tablet or something like that, because I promise you at that point, then their brain is like off. What you're looking for is their brain to somewhat be in like a receptive learning state, and then sit down and go, okay, so when I was on the phone, you all of a sudden just lost it. What's up with that? I want to know. And don't go into this with the assumption that you have all the answers, because really the best thing that you can do here is to get him to understand why he's doing it. And at 7, you have a real ability to do that. And so I would really go into that conversation in the most basic way of just saying, hey, so this is what happened. Tell me more about why you think that happened. Tell me more about what was going on with you when that happened. Well, I was just worried that this. And you might just say, I don't know. And then you dig down, you can retell the story. You go, okay, so I was on the phone, and then all of a sudden you asked me to, tie your shoes for you or do this, and you know how to do that. So like, I'm just wondering, like, how come that happened? And again, we're not looking, like, a lot of us hear these types of ways of talking to kids with this curiosity, and it can feel pretty threatening to those of us who grew up in punitive environments, because oftentimes those types of questions were rhetorical, and they were just like waiting for us to, hey, what's wrong with you? Explain yourself. And then you say, well, I was just, and then you go, no, you weren't thinking at all, and now you're going to get a punishment. But really what we're looking for here is that curiosity to get him to trying to unpack what's going on. And I think a real problem that parents have, a real misconception that we have, is that we know our kids better than they know themselves. In fact, when I wrote that sentence in the book, that kids by the age of 6 have an inner world that's robust enough that they know themselves far better than we know them, I got pushback. Like, I got pushback from my editor, who doesn't know any of, like, really about any of this stuff. And so it's not like he was like a PhD neuroscientist who was like, well, actually, let me tell you. No, he was just like, really? Are you sure? I'm pretty sure I know my kid better than they know themselves. And I was like, no. Once they have an inner world, like, you don't know what's driving their actions and behaviors. Sometimes we can come at it from an objective perspective, that understands, who's wiser. In the same way, by the way, that a therapist can help you to understand or unpack why you're participating in the same destructive, coping mechanisms that are maladaptive because they're an outsider. We can be that for our kids, but it doesn't mean that we know more about them than they know about themselves. And I really would start with that. I would just go, okay, and then I would make a plan. I would go, okay, so the next time I'm on my phone, what can we do? What do you think would be a good plan for, well, that's going to be the time when I can do this or that or the other. And here's some examples of things you can do. Number one, you can set a timer. This is good for you and good for your kid. Obviously, if you don't know when you're going to be off the call, you can't set a timer, but you can set a timer. That's a good one. You can make a questions parking lot. This is a fun one where you can have a stack of Post-it notes. And if you have a 7-year-old, he might be able to kind of write some things out or draw some pictures or something, depending on how good he is with his verbal or written literary skills. But you can make a questions parking lot where he can just start handing you sticky notes. Like, okay, here are all the things that I need your help with. And they can kind of stack up. And then when you get off the phone, you go, okay, well, I'm going to start going through these things. Okay. You needed me to put some peanut butter on your bread for you. Okay. Oh no, you already did that one for yourself. Okay. You just drew this picture and you just said, well, you want me to cut the crust off your sandwich? Okay, now I understand. And you go through it, and it's kind of like a fun game then, right? As your kid comes up with tasks for you to do while you're on the phone, it keeps them organized or distracted and organizing their thoughts rather than constantly just bombarding you with those thoughts in real time. Again, because even a 7-year-old does lack some of that impulse control. So when we're talking about impulse control with 4-year-old, that's very obvious to most of us. Toddlers lack impulse control. Yeah, and so the sky is blue, right? Like everybody knows that. But kids slowly develop impulse control. And kids who are ADHD or neurodivergent develop impulse control even more slowly than kids who are neurotypical. And so I don't expect a 7-year-old to have great impulse control. In fact, I expect them to only have the barest minimum amount of impulse control. But you can frame some of these things. You can make a plan of here are the things that we're going to do when I'm on the phone. And that may be a time when for him, that is a time to utilize, a screen or something like that, because for him, that's what he wants to do. And that's an okay thing, right? If you're on a work call, not if it's an every day I'm on the work calls for 3.5 hours. And so you have to come up with some other thing to do. But at that point, I would say, okay, well, if you're on work calls for 3.5 hours every day, we also just have to figure out a better way of managing work-life balance, because we can ask our kids to wait only so much, right? But having a visual timer and things like that can help with that. Again, that inability to understand the time blindness that kids have, where they don't, an hour feels like a day or a week or a month. 5 minutes can feel like 2 hours. Giving them a visual timer can really help with that as well. So those are some tips and tactics and strategies, but actually I think that those will be less effective than anything that you come up with your son. I think that the most effective tool here is actually to just sit down with your son, go back and forth, talk about this, talk about what happened, talk about the problem, replay the game footage, right? If he doesn't know what you're talking about when you say, hey, you're having a hard time when I was on the phone, you just walk back through. Yeah, so this happened and this happened and this happened. And now we're not judging. We're literally just describing. So I was on the phone and then you needed me to do this or tie your shoes or whatever it was. And what was that about? Because I know that other times you don't usually need my help with that. So I just am looking for, I just wanted you. Okay. Well, then what can we plan to do next time that you want me when I'm on the phone as an alternative? And again, we can do the hand on arm thing, but for my money, I'm looking at this and going, by 7, he can make his own plan. And also the hand on arm thing works definitely less when you're on the phone, because the whole hand on arm thing is because you don't want to be interrupted in an in-person conversation rather than being interrupted on the phone, he can be putting Post-it notes next to you the whole time, and that doesn't bother you. Or it should, maybe it does bother you, but it wouldn't bother me. So you guys come up with a plan together, and I think that you'll be a lot better off. But you have to name this stuff. A lot of us think that like we can just do this stuff without ever going to that place with our kids and naming it. You got to name this stuff, and that's a big piece of it. And so I just encourage you to do that. Anything that's mentionable is manageable. That's a Fred Rogersism. Okay, I have one more question. It comes from inside my membership. I asked them if I could share my response that I had given to them as a part of the podcast, because I thought it was a great question that related to this. And so here is the question from Eli inside the membership. Eli says, I just don't know how to handle interrupting without being mean. My 5-year-old will wait sometimes, but other times she just jumps in and I snap and I say, stop interrupting, because that's literally what my parents said to us. I don't want to be that intense. I also can't have her thinking that she can just talk over people all the time. I don't know what's the line between teaching patience and shutting her down. Sorry, I'm rambling. She's climbing on me right now. LOL. So, yes, Eli, thank you again for sharing this with the podcast community. But the thing that I told Eli, because I had some time to think about it, was we talked a little bit about that time processing piece, and specifically temporal processing. And when I say temporal, I'm not saying tempura, the battering of delicious deep frying of vegetables and things that you can get at Asian restaurants. I'm saying temporal, meaning time processing. And temporal processing happens I wrote it down for myself because I'm not that quick on my feet, in the dorsal lateral prefrontal cortex. And what happens what I mean by dorsal lateral relies on the dorsal lateral prefrontal cortex, is that they have to be able to, basically their brain has to be their prefrontal cortex, which is the last part of the brain that develops, has to be so developed that it can jump between different sides of the prefrontal cortex in real time, in order to understand how to process time. This is why kids struggle so deeply to have this sense of how long something takes, or be able to hold their, patience for a longer amount of time. It's because literally in real time, they have to be able to do a very complicated brain process in order to understand time. And in order to do that, just the ability to hold on to a thought, is really, really challenging for a kid. And it can be challenging I know that this is challenging for kids because it's challenging for me even as an adult with ADHD. It's one of my struggles is holding a thought when I'm in the midst of other things. Sometimes I wander on the podcast and I forget what I'm saying. That's a great example of where I struggle with this. And when you're stressed, man, it gets so much harder, because then your prefrontal cortex starts to go offline because you're in your stress response, and kids obviously are thrown into their stress response more quickly. And also they just don't have a fully developed prefrontal cortex to begin with, especially not at 5 years old. And so you can see where all of this stuff can just become very, very challenging for a kid. And so we are thinking about this as just wait and don't interrupt me in the middle of a conversation with somebody. And I just want to scream at them, stop interrupting, because it seems so simple, but actually it's much more complicated. It requires tons of mental gymnastics and emotional regulation techniques and all other things. And then we wind up lashing out and snapping at them and screaming, snapping, as Eli said, stop interrupting. And what does that do? It sends them deeper into their dysregulation, which shuts down their prefrontal cortex. What little development they have in their prefrontal cortex is shut off entirely, which just makes them, lose it. And why do we just scream, stop interrupting? Because we feel like we're raising an entitled, narcissistic monster who just can't, think about anybody but themselves. And so you can see where all of these different layers is a very simple problem on the surface. Well, my kid talks over other people, or my kid talks over me at the dinner table. Actually, it's a much deeper problem that has to do with brain development. It has to do with our own childhood baggage that we were probably told this is what Eli said, right? I was told to stop interrupting when I interrupted. So now I feel like that's the appropriate response, or maybe I don't even think it's the appropriate response, but I feel that it's the appropriate response because my nervous system has been trained that when a child interrupts, this is how you respond, because that was what was done to me. And so all of these things become this whirling, swirling tornado. And as they all interact with each other, we take this very innocuous problem that is age typical of a 5-year-old for all of the reasons that we've said. They struggle to hold on to their thoughts. They have no sense of time, of how long they've waited or how long they will have to wait. They struggle with impulse control. They feel like when anyone's not talking to them that it's a lack of connection and attachment to them. All of these things happening simultaneously triggers their amygdala. So they jump into the conversation, which then triggers us. And then we further trigger them. We send them deeper into the dysregulation. And all of a sudden, we have a kid who's melting down at the dinner table. And it feels like it's because we didn't let them dominate the conversation. But what is really is happening is that there was a lot of other moving pieces going on. And we just responded or reacted in that moment in a way that came from our own baggage. And so how would I react if I could react better? And sometimes I don't react better, just totally, like I said, began the whole episode by I just told my kids, like, go find something to do, right? That's kind of stop interrupting. It's not that different. I think it was a little, maybe I was a little bit better, but also I was in Pastor John mode, which means that I probably do parent a little bit more effectively no matter what, just because I know I'm being watched by people. Most of them don't know about whole parent, or if they know about it, they don't really follow it or anything. But even so, when you're in front of people, oftentimes you kind of temper your parenting differently. I might not be as kind if I had been, triggered like that and it had just been me and my wife around. Hopefully I would be. I'm trying to do better. But what I would say if I had all of my faculties about me, and if I had done some journaling work about this, which I've done, and I was really able to emotionally regulate in that moment rather than reacting, I responded. The way that I would respond would be to turn to my child and say, I want to hear what you have to say, but I need to finish listening to your brother, your dad first. You can put your hand on my arm and lets me know that you're here and that you want to tell me something. And I really care about what you have to say. And I think this is kind of as we come to the end of the episode. I'm trying to keep these episodes a little bit shorter and more digestible. As we come to the end of the episode, I think this is really where I want to land. Because if the fundamental need that is not being met in our kids in these moments is attachment and is attention, one of the ultimate hacks here is to just say, I want to listen to you. I actually really care about what you're saying. And I'll do this. Now, I don't do this much when when my kids interrupt me in conversations, but when my kids interrupt me, I'm working on something. If I'm, working on something for a whole parent, I'm writing or whatever, and my kids walk into the room and they're like, hey, dad, I want to show you this thing. I want to show you this. I will actually stop what I'm doing, not to look at their thing, but to turn to them, give them my full attention for one sentence to say, I really want to see that. I have to finish this. Otherwise I'll be distracted when I'm talking to you. I want to see that. Can you leave it right there? Or can you come back and find me in 5 minutes? You can go set a timer, whatever. But I start from the place of, I really care about what you have to say. And that's why I need to finish what I'm doing over here. I think that can be one of the most powerful things that you can say to your kid, because it kind of does everything that we've talked about up to this point. It gives them the permission to check in with you and know that you're attentive to their needs and their wants and their desires, that you're not abandoning them, that you're not just ignoring them. But at the same time, it protects the space to say, you're going to have to wait. And understand, My kids do not like waiting, even after I say that. But it becomes a manageable thing that's building their frustration tolerance and their patience and their emotional distress tolerance, rather than just sending them into dysregulation because I snap at them. And so I'm not saying, Eli, that I have not done exactly what you did, because I started the whole episode with a story about how I do that sometimes, especially when I'm in stressful environments myself. What I'm saying is, on my best days as a parent, which I hope are more than my not best days, I start with, I really care about what you're doing. But notice I didn't say that on my best days as a parent, I drop everything for my kids at all times. Because one surefire way to make a kid entitled is to constantly drop everything that you're doing and make the world revolve around them. Because then they'll receive the message that the world revolves around them. Not because they're a bad person or they're inherently narcissistic or because there's some sort of problem with their brain, but because you've said that to them through your actions. And so I think it's important to say, stop interrupting. But we can do that in kinder ways. And we can give our kids alternative behaviors, and we can understand developmentally what's going on so we don't take those things personally. And ultimately, the way to raise a non-entitled kid is that they are going to have to wait sometimes, but that the waiting does not have to be an attachment rupture, that the waiting does not have to be maladaptive and hurtful and painful for them. And I think that that's where we can end the episode, because in all of these things, it's easy to just say, well, just let them interrupt you, because eventually they'll grow out of that. And some of parenting is that they just do grow out of some of these behaviors. But I think the harder thing to do and the better thing to do is to say, no, I'm going to stay in this. I'm going to talk to them about it after it happens. If it keeps happening in one particular time, I'm going to give them alternative behaviors to do, whatever. But most importantly, I'm going to make sure that they know that I delight in their attention, that I love giving them my full and undivided attention. And then in order to do that, I actually have to finish what I'm doing before I give you my full and undivided attention. And by the way, here's a egg timer. And kids love egg timers. You should get an egg timer. I wish I had a sponsor that just gave me egg timers to give to you. Anyway, that's what I got for you in this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it gave you something to think about. And I'll try and do this again tomorrow night. An episode a day, as much as I can. See you next time. Thank you again for listening to this episode of the Whole Parent Podcast. If you are listening to this right now, yes, you in your car, driving somewhere, on a walk with your kids, perhaps your kids are melting down and you're listening to this on your headphones with the noise cancellation turned on. Whatever you're doing while you're listening, doing the dishes at night after your kids go to bed, I don't know. That would just be me if I was listening. Stop right now. I have 3 quick favors to ask you. I promise they're not going to take you very long. The first one, very, very easy. Go into wherever you're listening to this podcast and rate it 5 stars. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stars. The more 5-star reviews that our podcast gets as we accumulate episodes, the more likely it is to be pushed out to more parents who are searching for parenting podcasts to solve their problems. Whatever you got out of this episode, whether it was something to try with your kids, whether it was a new way to think about parenting, maybe this episode was not specifically about a problem that you're having, but you're somebody in your life who's having this problem. Go in and rate it 5 stars. And if you have an additional 30 seconds, that first one only takes you 10 seconds. If you have an additional 30 seconds, just type a few words for me to read. I love to read the reviews. If there's something specific that's helped you, write it out. It helps me to know what we should keep doing here on the podcast, week in and week out. The second question that I have for you, or request that I have for you, favor, let's call it, is to share this episode with somebody in your life who you think could use it. It might be another parent in your kid's class. It might be a sibling who has young kids. Maybe it's your kid's teacher or a faith leader in your life. Whomever it is, that you think should have this episode of the podcast or any episode of the podcast, send it directly to them. I know it's vulnerable to share podcasts with people who you might not have that close of a relationship with, or even more vulnerable if you do have a close relationship with them. But I promise you, so many of the people who listen to this podcast listened not because they followed me on social media, but because they got a personal recommendation from somebody in their life who said, hey, this guy has a way of talking about parenting that just works for me. You don't know if they listen to it or not. They might never reply, but maybe, just maybe, they'll love the episode so much that they become your new parenting partner out there in the world, doing things the same way that you are, and you might have just made your new parenting bestie. The last thing that you can do is definitely the biggest ask from me, but it is to go over to Substack. That link is down below in the bio, and to subscribe so that these episodes can keep coming to you. Paid subscriptions on Substack is the only way currently that I am being funded here on the Whole Parent Podcast. That is the only money that I receive. It is $5 a month. I think that this podcast is worth the price of a coffee for you. If it's not worth the price of a coffee for you, obviously don't do it. But if you're extra cheap like me, you can just subscribe annually. I know that you're going to listen for the rest of the year. If you know that you're going to listen for the rest of the year, just give me $50 up front, and then you don't have to think about it coming out of your credit card every single month. Those are the ways that you can support me. And as always, I think that you're a great parent already, but I do hope this episode gave you something to make you a little bit better. Take care.